apparently have yet to be working out. Oh, we're on. So, good evening, everybody. I'm going to, but apologies to people who I was speaking to last Saturday. I'm going to start with the same place I started that talk, but no doubt it'll head off rapidly into left field. So essentially the only important thing to develop for someone that really wants to understand what they are, understand reality, is to develop the ability to distinguish between actuality and fantasy, between actuality and imagination. This is difficult for a bunch of reasons. First of all, the normal human mode of consensus reality consists of a indistinguishable muddle of both, and people aren't even aware that there's these factors that are being indistinguished. It's all held to be more or less actual. Another complicating factor is, excuse me, that imagination is extremely subtle, because the intelligence that generates the imagination and it indulges in it is inconceivably functional and brilliant. So it's very good at generating highly detailed and nuanced and coherent fantasy. Another aspect that complicates the distinguishing these aspects is that, of course, imagination is actually actual. If it wasn't actual, it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be anything. You wouldn't know there was something there unless there was an actuality there for it to register. The cardinal principle of imagination, of fantasy, is that it pretends to resolution. It seems to present as if information or qualities or anything whatsoever can be or is resolved into some kind of a coherence that is then distinguishable and addressable. Actuality can be characterized or consists of the character otherwise among infinite otherwises, that it is not characterizable, it is not resolvable, it cannot be, no aspect of it can be precisely distinguished from any other aspect of it, because it's intrinsically infinite and unresolvable in every regard. So you can use those two criteria as the basis for distinguishing between, just those two criteria alone is the basis for distinguishing between actuality and imagination. Anything whatsoever that has any degree of seeming to be something, that's with any degree of specificity at all, that's a sure sign that it's fantasy, it's imagination, i.e. it's not true. It doesn't actually exist as such. Whereas anything that leaves you scratching your head, typically, ideally in wonder, is liable to be actuality, unless you have a particularly subtle fantasy in that case, which is quite possible. So in a sense, this is the essential task or path or engagement of genuine spirituality. It's just that this is leads directly to and ultimately to and comprehensively to direct realization, which is, of course, nothing other than realization of actuality. One rather interesting aspect of the actual relationship between fantasy and actuality is that imagination, fantasy, always exists within actuality. There's always some degree of imagination and fantasy occurring. It's part of the nature of the way this presents itself, this generates itself, this appears to itself, that is the case. So discovering actuality and realizing actuality does not mean the cessation of imagination. It's not like imagination is the bad guy and needs to be squelched or suppressed or destroyed or eradicated. On the contrary, it is the case that when you discover what actuality actually is, then you discover also what fantasy actually is and what imagination actually is as an aspect of actuality, of course, because it has to be or it couldn't exist. I mean, the nature of actuality, it means existing. It is. It has being. Actuality and being are entirely synonyms. So realizing what actuality is accurately and precisely and self-verifyingly includes, of course, realizing what imagination is. And this is the condition that realization consists of. This is the condition that, the fabled enlightenment consists of, or that entails liberation. Liberation is nothing other than liberation from delusion, which in delusion can be defined quite precisely as the inability to distinguish actuality from fantasy. The inability to distinguish between what actually is and what you just think is, i.e., being a crazy person, being nuts, which happens to be the normal human condition. Interestingly, and very glaringly in an election year like this. But it's always glaringly the case, because it is very much the case that, in this bizarre, at least in this bizarre yuga that we seem to find ourselves in, the overwhelmingly predominant mindset is one of inability to distinguish between actuality and fantasy.
See, if everyone is doing the same thing, then it's very comforting, because we're all sharing the same delusion together.
True, maybe so. But for those of us perverse enough or peculiar enough to be drawn into actually trying to discover what's actually going on, that becomes the challenge, that becomes the issue. So I can throw open the floor for a discussion. It won't actually get any more open than it is.
It seems like that last statement you said is sort of like the whole story of the universe.
Which particular last statement?
Well, when you were saying something about how we're trying to figure out what's really happening.
Well, some are, most aren't. Ultimately, you're right. In the ultimate sense, that is the whole story of the universe, because reality is trying to explore itself. Reality is trying to figure out what it is. God is trying to understand what God is. And, the way that is, the seeming process that is, being affected by is all this. So you're actually quite right in a very profound sense. But on a human level, even though ultimately everyone is exploring their own actuality, it seems as though the majority of people, or surpassingly few people, are doing it with very much subtlety at this particular point in time. Or maybe that's just a misassessment. Who knows? Anyway, what people are doing is irrelevant. The only thing that concerns anyone is what you're doing, or in my case, what I'm doing.
I don't think you can necessarily go by what somebody says for anything about the reality, because we don't really agree that substantially about what any word means. We have a lot of different nuances.
Well, that's a given, because the notion that words have meaning is itself a fantasy.
Yeah.
So by definition, the meaning, any meaning of any word is inaccurate. And inaccurate means wrong, means unreal.
It seems like art might be closer to truth.
Well,
Closer to
anything that
what,
is closer to truth.
I'm just saying as an expression for what little a human being can know or feel or conceive about truth.
Human beings can know everything about truth.
Oh, great.
Because the presence of your experience is truth. The actual concrete presence of the fact that you are experiencing, that your reality exists, is actuality, is truth, is reality. Plain and simple. It's when you think it, you know what it is, and then you try to agree, that's when it becomes imagination.
Is reality the same thing as actuality?
Yes. Reality, here's synonyms. Reality, actuality, being,
Presence or
sure, presence. I mean,
so fantasy is just a subtler aspect of reality.
Fantasy is an aspect of reality trying to pin down what it is, which is a doomed effort, because the very nature of what reality is turns out to not be susceptible to being pinned down.
So there has to be something out
So
there.
in a certain sense, imagination is reality's immature approach to itself.
Got it.
It's exploring itself and saying, gosh, I wonder what this is. I wonder what I am. And so it starts generating these hypotheses, which is fine, because that's an intelligent thing to do. But then if it naively settles on one of these hypotheses, oh, maybe this looks true. Yeah, this is it. This is what's going on here. That is naive in the sense that it's not perceiving the actuality precisely enough and subtly enough to notice the absolute infinity and absolute unresolvability of the conditions that are actually experientially present.
In some of your earlier remarks, you commented that many of us had some kind of mixture of reality and fantasy, to which I'm wondering, mixture of what? Isn't it like mostly 100% fantasy? I mean, how much percent of reality do you think anybody actually has?
Everyone experiences all of reality. Reality is being experienced by everyone completely. The presence of the sense fields, the presence of experience, the presence of consciousness, all of that is actual. And it's reality. The unreality enters in when the notion that one can form any sort of accurate or even semi-accurate idea of what any of it is.
So if you just like a baby lying in your bed in the crib, just staring up at the rattle or something or other, that's it.
Yes.
It doesn't get any better than that.
Yes, precisely so. And to a large degree, well, you remember the famous quote of Christ, supposedly, unless you become like a little child, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven, refers exactly to this condition, that original condition, maybe perhaps it's what's meant in Zen by the original face too, I wouldn't know. But the original condition of absolute unknown, but absolute let's say comprehensively engaged, is the totality of reality, pure and simple. And in a very direct sense, spirituality consists of noticing that. And actually, this is a lot easier to do than it might seem, because that condition never stopped. The naivety of when you were an infant and when you were 1 day old lying like that, that is the base, that's the ground of your experience. And all of the sophistication and analysis and rationalization that you've become very skilled at has been overlaid on that fundamental foundation, but the foundation was never squelched or suppressed or changed. So we all have the raw experience all the time, but typically we're so seduced by being involved in our more sophisticated layers of basically showing off our egoic mental skills of look how smart I am. I can say the alphabet. Because when you're a child, that's what smart consists of. Oh, mama. It's like, oh, you're so smart. You know my name, mama. Yes, you're a genius. And then you enter grad school and you start spewing all these elaborate theses and stuff, and then it's the same thing. You're basically saying mama again, but just in a very much more elaborated version of it. But all you're doing is regurgitating patterns that you were trained in. You don't actually know anything. Nothing has actually been added to the fundamental raw condition of experience. It's all just an overlay of pretentious importance.
So is there any value to like this, different spiritual teachers talk about signposts of, on your way to realization, and this such and such thing happens, such and whatever?
Possibly, but not bloody likely. because there is no uniform path or predictable patterning that unfoldment may proceed, and if it proceeds at all.
Each person is like totally different.
Everyone's completely different, yeah. And so erecting these kinds of notions, like the many more systematized spiritual systems try and do, is not doing anyone any favors, because you're just generating more imagination, and it's not that the things that are being specified are wholly irrelevant. They may actually have some relevance, but it's not particularly valuable to attend to it very much, because it's liable to just be a distraction and a seduction into irrelevancies.
And a search for resolution too, right?
Well, exactly. Exactly. Oh, is this or is this that? It's like, which signpost am I at? It's like, what? It's an absurd. Exactly. The short path is screw all signs, and you're there. Screwing, when there's no signs, that's the finish line. Simply because you're not putting them, you're not creating them. Because when there's any kind of demarcations or any kind of distinguishings, they're being put there. They're being placed there by imagination. It's an act of creation, and simply, and again, there's nothing wrong with that act of creation, except that it's liable to confuse the issue. But once you see that it is an act of creation, then you're liberated from being entrapped by it, and then the imagination can run amok, as it will anyway, because that's its nature, and you won't be seduced by it, because it's just a creative energy of consciousness. So signposts are a dime a dozen. I mean, you're being hit in the face with innuendo of infinite, signposts and analyses and all this continually. It's the nature of intelligence to do so. But none of it actually means anything. It's all just interesting hypotheses, or in most cases, not necessarily all that interesting.
I have an old esoteric, probably completely irrelevant question that's rooted probably in my desire to resolve something. So it's entirely inappropriate, but because of your talk, I felt in the beginning, I felt like there was an opening to it because of the way in which you spoke about reality and imagination as being the same thing. So something Jiddu Krishnamurti said that has always stuck with me, because I've never heard anyone else say it, and I couldn't quite get my head around it completely, was he said when the mind is quiet, because that was his kind of, I guess, his big focus, that sleep, which seems to me to be, or dreaming, I'm sorry, which seems to me to be the imagination at work in some form, right, disappeared. That there was only, because essentially he'd sort of silenced all the contradictions in his mental life in the course of the day, and so had no need to dream. And that has always confused me. So.
I don't know. It's hard for me to relate to that in those terms.
Yeah.
I would say that when one sees actuality, everything disappears without anything actually disappearing, because there's nothing here that is anything. So dreaming that's distinguishable as being dreaming disappears. Waking world disappears as being the waking world. It's just, it's always this. Basically, it's always this that is here, because it is always this that is here. And all these elaborate qualifications of its dream or its waking or the mind's quiet or the mind's active and all this, again, is just playing more games of fantasy, of pretending to be able to distinguish it.
Or it's modifications of consciousness, right?
Well, but the nature of consciousness is modifications.
Right.
You never get consciousness without modifications. You never get modifications without consciousness. Consciousness is very nature is creativity.
Isn't the lesser, and I know this, I don't even believe in my own.
As soon as you say lesser, you're already.
It does still seem preferable to me to have a serene condition of consciousness over some aggravated, anxious, depressed.
Yeah, but that's just a matter of taste. Some people like rock and roll, some people like classical music. Some people want to work out, and some people want to take a nap. Yeah. And that's all very well and good, but it has nothing to do with realization. Yeah. It's all good. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with taste.
So like when you said there's nothing here, nothing, what my mind said except something.
Well, except everything's here, but there's no things here.
Yeah.
It's like in a dream. There's nothing in a dream. In a dream, you can be dreaming, and it seems like this is happening and that's happening, and there's all these people, and you're interacting, and you're running away, and you're morphing, and you're going into this world, and all this crazy stuff. And you wake up, and you know, oh, it was just a dream. Nothing happened. There was nothing there. It looked as if there was something there, and the mind interprets it as all kinds of something, and that's imagination. Looking at the relationship between what seems to happen as the events in a dream versus the fact of what the dream actually is an absolutely perfect paradigm, you might say, for distinguishing between imagination and actuality.
However, you always say the dreaming itself is actual.
Of course.
It's not what is being interpreted to be.
The dream is actual, the supposed content. Yeah, the dreaming is actual, and the entirety of the dream is actual, but the interpretation of what's happening, i.e. the content, is imagination, which is exactly the same thing that's happening right here. You may think, oh, we're sitting at a talk, and I'm in a room, and I'm sitting in a chair, and there's all these nice pretty pictures around, and this, that, and the other. It's all fantasy. But nothing is negated. It's not like it's not here, but there's no it that's here. This is here, but this is not that. You can describe it in those terms, but it's a hopelessly partial and inaccurate description. So all of our descriptions, all of our analyses are oversimplifications. It's that simple. It's not that they're not true. They just are, they omit such an inconceivably vast percentage of the actuality is to be laughable. I mean, the actual information present in experiential field is literally infinite. And so the mind comes along and separates that down into, boy, there's a pretty room, all these gaudy pictures. It's like, so there's an infinity of information, and I'm trying to collapse it down to those 5 words or whatever, and pretend that like captures it, that inclusively says what it is. It's laughable.
But it's interesting that you say it isn't that it's not true. It's
no.
just that it's very,
it's inaccurate.
Incremental, tiny, ludicrously small portion of what's going on.
The implication is untrue.
Oh, the implication is
the implication that that's going on, and basically that's sort of the important part of the lion's share, or the bulk of it, or the entirety. All of that is absurd.
The seeking for resolution is born of a sense of insecurity, but when you explore that sense of insecurity, you recognize that there's no point to it.
Yeah.
No reason to be insecure.
Yeah. The fantasy that you gain anything, consensus reality, or let's say the normal human mindset, has the fantasy that resolving things is an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Having settle you down.
Right.
Well, or that you have status, you're safe. I'm safe if I can defend myself. I'm Peter Brown and I have a right to be here because of blank, 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 blank. It's like, who are you? What are you doing? What do you do with your life? And there's a kind of a neurotic urge to be able to come up with an answer to that question that carries some weight, or at least feels like it carries some weight, because you feel like you're defending something and somehow gaining something by that exchange. But in actual fact, you don't gain anything. You lose, on the contrary, because you lose the fullness of the unresolvability of the unanswered version of that question. I mean, if someone asks me, who are you and what are you doing? And I just look at them stupidly. I'm not pinned down. I'm not limited. I'm not tying myself into a perspective or a point.
Peter, when I wake up in the morning recently, there's this deep peacefulness, which it seems it seems at the time, in retrospect, significant. Right? Like you're talking before about, like, in martial arts, the basis of it is not reacting.
Yeah.
And so it seems like I'm in that sort of state, and then, like, I'll lie there and notice, and then, like, thoughts will come up. And it seems like I'm not like identifying with those thoughts, or getting carried away with those thoughts in the way that I usually do.
Sure.
Right? Like,
no, that's
later
right.
on in the day.
There's something like that can occur as one begins to make progress in yoga. And the important thing is not non-reactivity as something to strive for, but on the contrary, to look and see that due to the intrinsic nature of what this is, of what you are, there is nothing to react to. And so reactivity dies back as being relevant in the face of that self-evidence. And then, and so as yoga progresses, as one becomes more acclimated to the actual perspective, you'll notice that all sorts of reactivity and all sorts of getting caught up in these storylines will tend to recede in urgency. The event may still occur, the mind may still spin off, and the consciousness may follow the spinning off, but the whole sense that it matters, that there's anything there that has any importance, will tend to just die back and eventually be, virtually irrelevant.
It seems at the same time that like I want to make progress, and I almost want to take it as a programmatic thing to do. Like, I should try to stay in the state as long as possible. I should sort of let it seep as deeply as possible.
Right.
But that's totally.
That's a distraction.
Yeah.
You're playing. Anything where there's this versus that. Anything where you could do this and it would be somehow better than not doing it, or better than that, is basically fantasy. You're playing a game with yourself.
Okay, but at the same time, it seems like I'm not being carried away in the way that I usually do. Or
no, because even if that's occurring, you're also making genuine progress in the yoga. It's not mutually exclusive. You can still be lost in chasing after delusion and still be making progress in yoga. Because acclimatizing yourself to actuality is an irrational process. It's a familiarization through contact. It's completely irrational. It's, you could say it's somatic, but it's even low. It's lower than somatic. It's feeling being and letting being be what being is, conveying its very nature, which conveys all of these factors we've been talking about, its openness and its fullness and its unresolvability and its comprehensiveness and so on. And this is learned simply through the fact. The fact that it is so is the development of learning that it is so. And so you've been kind of plugged into that. And so that is a kind of a spontaneous, you could say, gathering of momentum or settling into that perspective relative to perhaps your prior perspective of getting more caught up in various game structures and such. But again, that can and will occur regardless of whether or not you're getting caught up in game structures and stuff. In other words, you don't need to withdraw from your life to practice yoga. Yoga happens under the table. All the details of your life and your business and your things, your goals and your failures and successes is happening on the table. Yoga happens under the table.
Yeah, and there aren't moments in which I'm actively engaged with noticing as opposed to not as actively engaged with it.
Well, there may seem to be, and again, you may try to do noticing and play the game of doing that, but all of that again is irrelevant to the actual noticing, which again happens intrinsically. And it can be, again, you can't make sense of it because it can seem like you're not doing it when you're actually doing it, and you're doing it and you're not doing it, and then, but again, of course it's unresolvable because everything's unresolvable. It makes absolutely no sense. So, cool. Welcome to my world. No, complete irrationality and complete nonsense is the nature of actuality. It's the nature of reality. I mean, all of our pretense of rationality and all of that. I mean, mind you, rationality and logic and all of this is a brilliant aspect of the functionality of intelligence, but it doesn't add anything or gain anything in the context of the fundamental nature of absolute irrationality, which is what intelligence actually is, and intelligence grows out of irrationality. Intelligence itself is irrational, and so all of its irrationality is still just an artifact of all of its seeming rationality is an artifact of its inherent irrationality, which it can never leave, it can never depart from. Right?
Right. Sounds so rational.
Yeah, and you can put that really rationally. You can put the irrational very rationally.
I do find that even the most intelligent things that I come up with are essentially coming from nowhere.
Of course.
Yeah. So there is this fundamental formless source or whatever that rises up like an ocean wave and forms itself into a hot dog or something right there. I have almost a continual experience of my own radiance, so I don't have to wonder, because I wonder if there's something called spirituality out there, because I'm constantly feeling it. And I've had enough experiences of the world being a mirage or projection or whatnot, that I look at the world most of the time looking for, flaws in the matrix or whatever. I'm constantly looking to see, where is the projection going to break down and see what the gray light is sits behind it.
Sure, everything is an outgrowth that comes from nothing. Just pretty sure it is all experience.
But even just sitting around all the time, I just find myself constantly radiating energy.
Sure, of course. Well, you are. That's what you don't just do it. You are it. You are the radiation of energy from nowhere.
I don't have any problem believing it. It's a continuous process.
Yeah. Well, you don't need to believe it. You can't stop it.
You can't turn it
It's
off.
self-evident.
There's no backing out of it.
There's no off switch to experience.
And I can't do anything more than what I'm already doing.
Who knows? I don't want to emasculate your aspirations. By all means, do more than you're already doing.
You once told somebody, not me personally, but I got a quote from you that said that the reason you were having these classes and bringing people in was to further your own practice of light. That
Sure.
we were just a bunch of light, and looking at us was spiritually uplifting to you in a sense because it enabled you to kind of deepen your own experience.
Sure. It's pretty much the same reason why I watch TV at night. It's the same thing. You know, it's, I mean, you know, this is arguably distinguishable from that because
we're no better than an ad for Windex or something.
well, I don't watch commercial TV, but yeah. Well, basically, sure. As a matter of fact, yeah. I mean, all one ever engages with is the patterns that appear in experience, and one pattern is pretty much interchangeable with another when you get down to it. You know, at that point, it becomes a matter of personal proclivity, of temperament, you might say. Like some people like to talk, and people like to talk might like to talk to someone. And so they might look for a situation where there's someone to talk to so they can exercise this talking. But in doing that, seeing what it actually is not any different than watching TV or dreaming or sleeping or reading a book. You're dynamically interacting with patterns appearing in experience, which is all you ever do. You can't do more than that. You can't do less than that. You can't not do that. And so the particular patterns you seem to be drawn to, like we were talking about taste earlier, you know, like some people like to go to a talk and other people like to go get in bar fights and, you know, whatever. Yeah. It's like, okay, cool. But it's all just interacting with experiential energy that's spontaneously appearing in the experiential field. You know, and getting into that, you know, where does taste come from? Where does proclivities come from? It's just getting into the mystery of karma, which is, you know, as of course unresolvable as everything is. So what's the point? All you can do is observe that it seems to be more or less like that, or at least describable in those terms, loosely.
One of my favorite quotes, Krishna supposedly said that karma was a great mystery. I thought, Krishna couldn't figure it out. Man, that's going to be really tough.
No, great mystery is what we got. Just say what anything is, you find great mystery, which is the whole point. I mean, that's what realization is. Like, this is an infinite mystery. You know, no more, no less than the Big Bang or a galaxy or a newborn baby or anything else. It's the same thing. It's literally precisely the same thing. It's, you know, this radiant presence.
When you say the phrase, this is what you're engaged in, but that's almost too much.
Oh, it's much too much. It's a euphemism.
Right, because you are this.
Yeah, there's no me and there's no
you and this is you.
No, but poetically or metaphorically, it can be partially euphemized as a, you know, energy dancing with itself, or energy engaged with itself, or energy exploring itself. Not that those are precise or accurate, but it you know, it may suggest the flavor of this dynamism, because even though it's a total zero-sum game, nonetheless it's full of innuendo. It's full of apparent dynamism. It's full of apparent, you know.
It suggests the potential for exploration of that.
Sure, exactly.
So what is engagement? Who can be engaged to what when it's all just here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good comment. If
it's just that it's easy to get caught up or to fall back into mentation or thinking that there's some engagement that has to occur.
Of course,
So for
any
that, you're
any
already a
statement-
step away.
any statement is that. Any statement is a suggested inaccuracy. Period. But a statement like that is arguably, and it's all relative. Someone that's caught up in their life, let's say they have a normal consensus reality worldview, if you tell them, hey, all you're doing is dancing with your own energy, which is actually not any truer than what they think is happening, but relative to the complex, convoluted version that they're maybe imagining, it's a step towards a simpler erroneous paradigm that possibly easier to see through, or not.
If it doesn't lead to exploration, though.
Well, that's the
it
point.
just becomes another belief.
That's the point, to lead to exploration.
It has to be an exploration.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's what this is all about.
I mean,
People, all of this information is only relevant for people that are drawn to exploring what this is, to exploring themselves, to exploring their sexuality. To anyone else, it's a bunch of gibberish. Who gives a shit? What a bunch of whack-offs sitting here talking about all this absurd gibberish, Jesus Christ. What a bunch of nerds. Get a life.
yeah.
But for those of us who are the nerds and the whack-offs, it's like, no, this is really vital. So to speak. The principle of the yoga itself is the essence of simplicity. But in practice, for any individual, it can seem to be very complex because it has to be engaged in depending upon where you seem to be. And it's important to get outside of that. Seemingly. But wherever you think you are, it's like a trail of breadcrumbs. So wherever you think you are, anything that gets you outside of that's a move in the right direction. But then you're liable to think you're somewhere else. And so then the cycle repeats itself. So spiritual information is just all over the map. It can be just any kinds of weird crap and totally mutually contradictory. Because the point is not the truth of the information. The point is the utility of the information and shaking somebody up and torpedoing their normalcy to some degree, so that they're motivated to look around and scramble around to reach out. The point is not about conveying truth or giving accurate information.
Because you can't do that.
Spiritual teaching is essentially destructive. It's essentially disruptive.
When you're trying to break the fixation of
Yeah,
the imaginary stuff,
exactly.
especially at the parts that are highly dysfunctional.
Exactly.
Which is the point of that.
Yeah, exactly.
But isn't breaking the fixation the same thing as what we're not trying to do? I mean, it's also.
What's the not trying to do part?
Getting caught up in what we're trying to do.
Well,
I mean, just.
the problem with fixation is that the fixation is liable to reinforce the notion that the fixation is accurate and important. In other words, whatever one is obsessed with, say I'm obsessed with being successful in my life, say. So that means that I have some sense that that's really urgent and important and I'm really motivated in it. So breaking that fixation can help me to discover that in actuality, the fixation didn't matter. So it's the fixation, wanting to be successful in life is not what's the problem. The problem is thinking it's important, thinking it matters, thinking it's urgent. And so breaking the fixation is a way to discover that unimportance, because you discover that nothing is actually gained or lost in life. We never actually get any, everything changes, but we never actually get anywhere. We're always right here. It's always just you here, like it always has been from the beginning. It's going to be at the end, just you here. And, you know, but it's easy to think there's all this stuff happening and it has importance and you're gaining things and losing things and all that, you know. And that's the problem. The problem is thinking any of it matters. It's all basically, it's like a dream. But, you know, it's you know, well, Shakespeare said it so eloquently, you know, full sound and fury signifying nothing. You know, it's a complete zero-sum game. Nothing is gained or lost, even though all this shit seems to be happening, even though there's infinite information, which seems to be meaningfully and progressively interacting with all sorts of other infinite meaningful information to evolve and produce and you know, metamorphose and all this. And that is the appearance. That is the way it presents itself to itself. But none of it is actual, because it isn't actually that. When you go trying to see the way in which it's that, you don't find any that there. You know, anything that's happening, you try and find the thing that's actually happening there, and it's like a mirage. The closer you study it, the less you can pin it down. I mean, physicists encounter this problem. All science encounters this problem. You know, we study it and try and pin it down, and it's great theory, you know, and then you look closer and nope, wrong. Here's the new theory, great theory, and you look closer, nope, wrong. And it's going to be like that forever, because the actuality is unresolvable. It's intrinsically unresolvable. It's not that we're too stupid to resolve it, it's that it cannot be done. It's not the kind of a condition that could be resolved. You know, how do you...
I'm not a soul on a journey of evolution of consciousness or whatever.
Right. And yet, you can't say that you're not that, because you can't resolve that you're not that. I mean, that may be one poetic, metaphorical way to describe what's happening. And it may not be wholly inaccurate, but like all descriptions. But it's certainly not true. It's not comprehensively the case.
Well, it's attractive and easy to buy into, because
Oh,
I've
sure.
already bought into this idea of
Right.
I am a person that needs to be successful, and I'm
Be very, very wary of attractive and easy to buy into.
I'm not most successful if I wake up or have some experience of realization.
Waking up and realization is not success. It's like hitting the reset button. You don't gain anything. You don't get anything. It just clears out all the bullshit. It's like rebooting your phone when it freezes up. Realization is just a reality check. It's getting real, and you never were not real. But realization is noticing that is actually the case, and the way that is the case, which you actually always have been noticing. But you haven't been letting yourself be aware that you're noticing it, because you've been so caught up in complexities and elaborations, which are partial truth, and so it obscures the actuality. Doesn't actually obscure it; just distracts from it. Let's say.
And it's possible to have glimpses of that from time to time.
You always do. You always have had. You always have had and always will have.
But
even in realization, you have glimpses of it.
You were saying that
you never actually see it, because you can't be pinned down.
But you were saying at one point that the awakening that is not sustained is not a real awakening or realization, that you didn't really see if it goes away.
Realization of anything that is not always the case is not actual realization. And yet, realization is not the achievement of some finality. Realization is not seeing everything. Realization is the seeing that there is no everything to see. So in a profound sense, realization is clearly seeing that there is no realization. The fantasy of realization is the ultimate boogeyman. Just plain old boring normalcy is the realization. Of course, it's not so plain and not so old and not so boring when you look closely. But
and that stuff you talk about with development, it would seem along the same lines that any sort of development is a fantasy.
Yeah, it is. But there's nothing wrong with, in the beginning, in the earlier stages of the development may seem to be relevant, and so it's fine to explore those kinds of considerations. When you begin to get more mature, you see for yourself the way in which that's not so. At which point, since the relevancy disproves itself, then you're no longer concerned with such things. And again, it's not that you can disprove. What was the word you used? Progression, development. Development.
Yeah.
It's not like you can disprove development because you can't resolve that it isn't either. Just like you can't resolve that it is. But its relevance in the face of what this more comprehensively can be seen to be just falls away. I mean, in a certain sense, everything is true. Sure, there's development, sure, there's achievement, sure, there's success, sure, there's failure, sure, there's all these things. But when you look at what they actually are, they aren't really that. They're just harmonics of the great omnipresent infinity that has never gone anywhere and has never come from anywhere. But they're not negated. Nothing is negated. It's very weird and paradoxical. That's just why you can't approach this stuff logically, because it's totally irrational. Nothing is negated, but it's not true. But it's not negated. Not canceled out. It just isn't that. And it is perfectly seeable and perfectly knowable what it actually is, which is what renders the irrelevance of the seeming importance that all these sub-aspects seem to have. It's not that the sub-aspects are a problem or that you even should be not engaging in them. It's just that they aren't anything. They aren't what they pretend to be. They're echoes of echoes of echoes, you could say, poetically. Sounds very mysterious and mystical, doesn't it?
If you had to give advice to anyone, you don't have to, but would you encourage people to just do what they like? Do what they
Always.
feel? Yeah.
Always that. But I would do what you like, but try to look at it intelligently. It's not, spirituality is not about what you do or don't do. It's about seeing what it is. But practically speaking, if you do what you like, essentially, you're making less friction, which is liable to make less distracting internal struggles of fighting with yourself in your imagination and so on and so forth, which is at best just a distraction. You're actually gaining anything by all that, so why engage in it? So if you just let go and go into hedonism or go into whatever your nature is, and let it and follow the line of least resistance, then you're liable to be minimizing your own internal friction, which is liable to free up your attention and to looking around at what's actually going on. which is the only thing that's important. Because what you do or don't do doesn't matter in the least, literally. That's just a matter of practicality.
Didn't you, one of your teachings was that we don't have freedom to decide anyway, that we're like children who are in a play car with a plastic steering wheel.
Sure.
We think that we're steering, but actually we're not doing anything.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can turn the wheel all you want, and you have freedom to do that. But don't be surprised if it doesn't seem to do a whole lot.
Well, one thing I noticed is that I can't just choose to do things. I have to kind of figure out which things want to be done.
Sure.
And try to avoid trying to do things that don't want to happen.
Sure. Well, we all develop our own artfulness and pragmatism and engaging with our own karma and stuff. You know, it's part and parcel of exploring who we are and our functionality. But none of that in itself has importance. Again, it's just the main thing, you know, from a spiritual point of view. I mean, from its own point of view, it can have all sorts of importance. If you want to achieve something, then by all means, you better do it sufficiently well to achieve it, or not. But from a spiritual point of view, whether you achieve or not is irrelevant. The thing is to see what it is.
Doesn't matter how good of a job you do, I mean, they fail.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, success or failure is a complex proposition. Best laid plans of mice and men, etc.
Could you say more about doing the things that you like to do? Otherwise, there's friction because.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I sense a lot of that friction and a lot of the it seems like I don't know what I like to do exactly.
But you may like to have the friction. You may like to be floundering around trying to figure out what you like to do.
Yeah.
I mean, in a certain sense, it's impossible not to be doing exactly what you want. So if you're not doing what you want, you're actually wanting to not do what you want. Or if you're struggling with yourself, you're actually wanting to struggle with yourself. And ambivalence and all this kind of thing and uncertainty is actually very, very, it makes perfect sense because no one is coherent anyway. You know, you're a hodgepodge of conflicting energies and urges, which are all trying to go in different mutually exclusive directions. So it's no surprise you don't know what you're doing. I don't mean you, I mean one.
That's two.
Huh?
That's two.
Well, one, perhaps.
I was reading one of these astrology descriptions in the Chinese zodiac. And I was noticing, I'm looking at mine, and it's like conflicted. It said, hang out in his thoughts. You know, I was like, God, I really don't like that, but God damn it, it's kind of accurate.
Yeah, when we come upon accurate images of ourselves, we tend to, our self-loathing tends to be reflected, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks, Erna.
Thank you.
I put the last of the sugar in.
Thank you so much.
But you say you always know what you like to do.
No, I don't know what I like to do. I just do what I like to do. The difference. And I can tell what I like to do by looking at what I'm doing.
So why is there that about you?
It's the same with you. It's not any different.
You know, I think, Peter, the distinction is that I think sometimes we do things, but there's a narrative going on that, oh, I really shouldn't be doing this.
Well, of
Or I
course.
don't like doing this.
Well, of
When
course.
in fact, you wouldn't be doing it unless you were going to do it.
Of course.
So how can
You're
not
doing
be
what you
yourself?
like, and if you're criticizing yourself internally in your
That's
dialogue
just the
for it,
narrative.
that's something else you'd like to do.
Yeah.
It's like, I like to be bad, and I like to pretend I'm trying to be good. You know, I'm trying to quit smoking. I really should be quitting smoking yellow light. You know, it's like what you want to be doing is smoking, and another thing you want to be doing is pretending to quit smoking because then you can feel good about yourself if you're trying to be
Because
good.
you have the story that. wanting
So
to
it's a
quit
win-win.
smoking
You
is
get it
a
on.
thing.
You get it on both
I don't
ends.
wanna quit.
I have these weird experiences every now and then. And I've had a number of them, obviously, and in one case, I noticed that God was generating my entire experience, including the idea that there was a me experiencing it. Another experience I had, I lost the observer, and there was no observer at all. There was just stuff happening. It didn't last too long. But I'm thinking to myself, is that something I should be trying to dwell in, or is that just looking out the window, or what exactly is that?
It's a meaningful insight. Don't try and dwell in anything. Meaningful insights come and go. And like all insights, none of them are absolutely true, because that would predicate a resolvability. It actually is precisely that way.
See, I have this belief that there's these cuckoo clocks that have these figures, and the figures, are going around in a circle and they're doing things. And they're like a little guy comes out of the cuckoo clock and hits a bell with a hammer, and he goes back in the clock. And I think that's pretty much all I'm doing. I'm just the guy that comes out of the cuckoo clock, dings the bell with a hammer, and goes back in.
Sure.
I mean, that's how much volition I have. I can't do otherwise.
Sure. Sure. I mean,
There's no me.
You
There's
can't.
no decision making.
Yeah, you can't. What you are, whatever that is, can't not be what it is, and that's it could. And if it could, then that would be what it is. It's something that could not be.
I can only go out and ding the bell and go back in.
True. Yeah, all insights are true and valuable, but just none of them are comprehensive. I mean, beautiful, true, profound insights are a dime a dozen. Everyone has them all the time, every instant. And it's great. That's really. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay that. On the contrary, there's a lot of pithy, meaningfulness there, joy. But none of it is the end, because there is no end. None of it is the truth, because there is no truth. And the truth is that there is no truth, and that's the final truth.
Well, one of my favorite quotes from Don Juan, whom I still think fairly highly, is he says, "There's no final step to anything."
Sure. Don Juan's great. I think he rocks.
There's no final step to anything.
Carlos was a dude for sure. In technical spiritual terms.
That's a technical term in Tibetan.
I mean, he may have been a manipulative, misogynistic asshole, but what's that have to do with anything? Sorry?
Therefore, he had no choice in that. He was just a hallucination.
Of course.
What about what it's Frank, right?
Yeah.
What Frank was saying about avoiding doing the things that don't want to be done, or something like that.
Well, if the room hasn't been built, you can't enter into it.
That's good. You could probably build a whole book around that, and sell a million. I'm not sure what you're asking. Why don't you put it in your own? Why don't you put it in your own terms, and then maybe we can work a question up out of it. We can fake a discussion around it.
What he said, it sounded very intriguing.
Well, I didn't hear him say anything precisely like what you said, so I don't know.
I'm sorry, what did he say?
No one knows.
If things don't want to happen, it doesn't matter how much skill you have, they're not going to happen, because you can't enter the room.
It sounded before, like the way I was interpreting it was he was saying he's kind of like in this sort of flow or something like that, and there's just alignment with reality, or
there's no flow, there's no non-flow, there's no alignment, there's no non-alignment, and yet what there is can look like all of that and so much more.
More and different
Or not.
philosophy of Peter Brown, that everything is more and different than we thought it was. That's on his page.
Less of a philosophy than an observation, but you can definitely work it up into a philosophy.
Well, again, someone else. And Jeff talks about us as being these meat puppets, right?
Mhm.
So there's, again, just this sort of volition that comes from nowhere. Like,
Well, I mean, that's a perspective, and like all perspectives, it has merit, but it's not true. You know, there's, you know, I mean, every perspective is viable, but it's not completely true. You could say, you know, God does everything and I don't do anything because it all just appears from nothing. Okay, that's a good perspective. It's a lot of truth there. You can say there's an awful lot of functionality here. There's an awful lot of intelligence here. There's an awful lot of engagement. I can move my hand, or I can move my hand, or I can move this finger, you know, and it feels like I'm doing it. That's true. And there's a lot of merit to that perspective. And the fact that those two perspectives are contradictory is irrelevant, because neither of them is completely true. And the truth is unresolvable. So the truth is neither of those. The truth of will is there is no truth of will. The whole category of will is an absurdity, which doesn't negate the phenomena to whatever degree it may seem to be a phenomenon. But all of that is a partiality of something which is actually not partial. So it's an oversimplification.
so all I can know is that.
No, just all I can know is.
Oh,
Stop there.
all I can know is.
Don't finish the sentence. There's no end to
One of the questions, I read all these books and I wonder whether any of the idea is true or not. This guy was saying that sitting around feeling weird has no value, and partial experiences have no value. That the only thing that makes any difference at all is to have some kind of excruciating pain at the top of your head and a loss of the world or something. Now, everything else is just complete waste of time.
Okay.
sounds like success in that mode would be a pain in the ass, or in the head in this case.
If you don't have excruciating pain in your head for a couple of days and then lose the entire world permanently, then everything else is just a waste of time.
My wife is a city of that pen. A city of that pen.
She has a lot of-
Excruciating pain in the head and lose the world. Is that familiar?
I think that these partial experiences have a lot of time, if nothing else.
All partial experiences are great and they're all meaningful, but none of them is final. None of them is comprehensive.
So, I don't know why I'm saying this, but I'll say it anyway because I thought of it.
Yeah.
So can we just, so the meditative experience is non-existent also. I mean,
Sure, absolutely. Or all experience is meditative experience.
well, yeah, that's what I was trying to get at.
I mean, pretending that there's some experience which is meditation and some experience which is not meditation, and somehow that's better and this is worse, and you get something from that and you don't get something from this, it's all absurd. It's games that we play with ourselves.
So, but then when you're meditating, though, there is a dialogue. It seems to me, for myself,
Sure.
that there's a dialogue being established. And sometimes you recognize it and sometimes you don't.
Sure. So meditation may be valuable, but any experience is valuable. And the notion that meditation is more valuable is a pretense.
Well, I mean, I was just talking about experience.
Yeah, no, me too,
Not
sure.
meaning that it's bad or the other, just
Right.
just experience, period. You know?
Hmm.
And calling it meditation is just
Yeah.
trying to depict a stationary point in the situation.
Sure.
Is impossible limitless.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But all of these, consciousness plays all these games with itself. Meditation and different activities and different this and trying that and letting go of this and all that. And it's none of it matters a whole lot. It's all valuable equally, but none of it is better or worse than any of the rest of it. It's all just modes of this exploring itself. And so it's all equally valuable. The mistake is to hierarchize it. The mistake is to suppose that something is better than something else. Because that would be, to be able to claim that accurately, you'd have to be able to resolve that they're, first of all, that they're different, and second of all, resolve what they actually are, so that you can have a basis for distinguishing. And in actual fact, that just can't be done. It's all unutterable, unresolvable weirdness.
So there seems to be this kind of game going on of like things coming into and out of existence, seeming to come into and out of existence.
Sure.
And I guess the way that that's playing out through in my life, or what seems to be my life, is I'm sitting and I have a thought, something I'd like to do, and then I'm Googling that thing, and then I'm talking to someone, seeming to talk to someone about that, having that experience, what it would be like, going out and trying it out,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. Like there seems to be these different levels of actualization,
Right.
and de-actualization,
Right.
And kind of a thread of imagination as well.
Right.
And I'm just trying to get straight. What you're saying is just notice that.
Yeah. Because every aspect and every component of that is not what it seems to be. It's not that it's not what it seems to be, but it's much more than that, and also very different than that.
Okay.
So you're not negating it or canceling it. You're letting it open into what it actually is, which is much, much more than you're holding it to be. Imagination tends to analyze and then look at process and look at causality and look at goals and achievements and all of this stuff. And again, you're not negating that or canceling it out. You're just noticing the way in which that, in the context of being what it is inconceivably vastly more than being that, in ways that make it, that completely and utterly alter the tenor of what it seems to be. So again, what you're doing is not the point. Like, doing that is all great, and even getting caught up in it and doing it with great aspiration and all, that's great. But at the same time, it's almost a schizophrenic thing. At the same time as you're doing it and getting caught up in it, just look at the whole thing. Look at the actual experiential component is of any aspect of that. So when you say you're Googling, what is the actual experience that, the actual experiential presence and the experiential qualities and characteristics that you're using that description of? And notice the way in which what's actually there is inconceivably richer and more than simply being Googling or anything.
Yeah.
So you discover just a multi-dimensionality and a non-linearity to things. There's never just one thing happening. It's not like one thing happens which leads to another thing happening, which leads to another thing happening. That's completely absurd.
That's the fantasy.
Yeah, but maybe the fantasy. But
Maybe, okay.
but you know, when you look at actuality, it's just there's just infinite different, you know, qualities that are actual experiential qualities present that have their own implication and their own flavor and their own dimensionality, whatever. I mean, you know, again, trying to list the characteristics as is absurd, because then that would necessitate be able to resolve them, which can't be done.
Yeah.
So it's always about looking, or more accurately, rather than this word look, and sort of feel, experientially feel what is present in real time. And you'll discover more that's there that's just not even vaguely included in your description of it. And again, it's not negating or canceling out your description. But the actual content will intrinsically do that.
Including the non-permanent, so.
Of course, all that.
Because when you say in real time, there's no such thing, because
Yeah.
nothing is stable long enough to actually get a description.
Right, but you discover that by feeling that.
Right, exactly. Sensing that.
And kind of looking, just saying out loud, becoming more conscious of the description, and then seeing that irresolvability. I notice there's like a lightness
Sure.
that seems to come in there.
Sure. You can approach it, through kind of philosophical deconstruction like that.
Yeah.
But the most powerful, and that's fine, but the more powerful and efficient way is through just irrational feeling. Feel the presence of the experience. So like right now we're having a conversation. I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, we're saying things, and this is semi-intelligent, and your words you're saying are more or less following on words I'm saying, and vice versa. There's some apparent responsiveness and all that. But then if you just feel the whole field of the experiential field in the context of this, that's there. But what else is there? What else is there? Flavors, characters, dynamisms, whatever. And what's their vector? What's their flavor? What's their implication? And all of a sudden, whoa! That's not canceled. The conversation isn't canceled out, but it's a partialization of something which is vastly more than it.
The ability to feel the description you just gave is, can't be self-generated or
No.
the result of effort or anything like that. It's either you're feeling it or you're not.
Well, it's simpler than that, because you're always feeling it. So that's why I like to call it noticing. So you're not doing anything that you're not always doing. You just let yourself notice that that's happening. In other words, when you're experiencing something that you're focusing on, you're also experiencing everything else. It's not actually erased just because you're focusing or obsessing or whatever. And notice that fact, but you don't even need to suspend your focus, but just notice that focus occurs in an inclusive context of everything else, always. And all the everything else comes with, and is actually relevant, is actually germane. Pretending that what I'm focusing on exists autonomously and is separate, somehow extricated from its context, is absurd.
It's context which is, of course, unknowable and indescribable.
Well, it's all unknowable, it's all indescribable, but it's all most intimately known. Saying it's unknowable, you're not removing it. It's of a nature that it cannot be pinned down, but it can be and is already unstoppably being most intimately felt. The experience is already being felt. So noticing is really simple. One acquires a trick of it because it's not something you need to do because you're already doing it. So letting yourself notice you do it, it's possible to cultivate to some extent the ability to do that. But you can't say how, because it's not a rational
So
thing.
when I'm doing it now,
Sure.
but I'm also labeling my experience.
That's fine. You don't need to be not labeling. Labeling is not the problem. It's seeing that's the problem. Label all you want, partialize all you want, obsess all you
labeling
want.
feels like a form of tightening up, too.
Sure, but tightening up happens in a context of the non-tight. Tightening up's not a problem at all. Because even when something tightens up, nothing has been tightened. It just means there's a tightening here.
Yeah.
Everything cannot be tightened. It can't be done.
That's true, yeah, that's what I was gonna say, is when you sense tightening, you also sense that there's a lot of non-tightening. So
It's like-
tightening is just
yeah.
a small.
Yeah,
part
or it's
of
like busy
your
mind,
experience.
busy mind versus still mind. Busy mind happens in a context of still mind, and vice versa. You know, you want to find still mind, you don't need to stop your busyness. Just look over here where it's not happening. You know, I mean, literally. The background, it's like, you know, it's like waves in the ocean. You know, there's all these waves in the ocean. Yeah, well, just like push your head in the water and look underneath, and there's no waves. The waves haven't gone anywhere. You don't need to fight the waves or stop them or pave the ocean over or something. Just look that most of the ocean is actually not waves. It's something else entirely. And the same with busy mind, the same with tightening, the same with obsession, the same with all the things that we struggle with in terms of our personal energies and personalities and stuff. They're irrelevant because they're small energy events in a vast context, which utterly is beyond them. And all of most of which is completely contrary to, in fact. So our tightening is a small event in a vast looseness and openness. And our busyness is a small event in a vast peacefulness and continuity, so on and so forth. And that's already being known. It's already being experienced all the time. So it's just a tiny trick of the light to just sort of switch your attention. It's almost like an optical illusion. You know that thing with it looks like two faces looking at each other, and then if you look differently, it looks like a bird bath or a vase. You know, how do you get? Suppose you're seeing two faces looking at each other. How do you get to the bird bath? You know, it's doable. You can't say how you do it. You just sort of, and then all of a sudden you're not seeing faces. You're seeing a bird bath. So it's just like that. It's not like a new state or an alternative state. It's just letting yourself notice exactly the same presence from a sort of a different inside out, contrary or opposite perspective. And it's a trick, and it is developable. Or let's say, by stumbling onto it, one can seemingly stumble onto it more easily, progressively.
You're talking about kind of noticing different facets of experience.
Yeah, noticing that any facet of experience exists in a context of other facets that are other than it and different than it.
Seemingly.
Yeah, seemingly. Everything's seemingly. You can just anything you could possibly say or think, just append the seemingly to it. You can take that as a given, and you don't need to bother with being explicit.
Well, also, along with seemingly, you can say apparent, and you can say hypothetical.
Yeah, well, they're all synonyms.
Those also work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it certainly is a challenge.
Well, it is. It's all a challenge. It's all a challenge, sure. I mean, that is the challenge. The challenge is this bizarre, amazing paradox that you are is its own challenge. Makes its own gravy. But it is also its own solution. And the solution isn't doing something with it. The solution is what it is. Just like the challenge is what it is. It's the same thing. You sort of just look at it different. You see the way in which it's a solution.
Well, you know,
It's only a challenge if there's the notion that it needs to be a certain way, because that's where the challenge arises.
Sure.
If you think that that complexity and habits and all those things shouldn't be there, then you're creating the challenge of trying to get rid of them. But if you see that habits or any of those things are no different than the sun coming up and the sun going down, you know, it's just another apparition.
Absolutely.
And there's no investment or any attachment to it, then you, okay, so have a habit of doing this, that, or the other, whatever it is, doesn't matter.
Sure. This is a challenge. This is a challenge to the extent it's not accepted.
Right.
Non-acceptance is what creates a challenge. And in a very profound sense, the serenity prayer is the ultimate koan.
Yeah.
Wonderful, 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 very, infinitely deep, pithy teaching. It's about quitting time.
Is it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming. It's been a pleasure seeing you. Not yet. First we quit, then we
No,
make
it's just my
announcements.
job to remind you to remember to say something. I have